You've been working for decades and saving for decades, and now you're approaching that moment in time where you're starting to plan for retirement and work goes away, and now what you have has to last. Today, we are walking through that, a high net worth guide to securing your retirement. Enjoy the show. We hope you've been enjoying all the episodes from Secure Your Retirement. If you'd like to keep learning and receiving these episodes, hit the subscribe button and the bell so you receive alerts when they come out. We've helped thousands of listeners get on the path to securing their retirement. Now it's your turn. Let's dive in. Welcome, everyone, to the Secure Your Retirement podcast. Very excited to come to you today. Today we are having a very special episode entitled From Work to Wealth, a high net worth guide to a secure retirement. That's the name of our podcast, Secure Your Retirement. The name of our firm is Peace of Mind Wealth Management. We think those two names go hand in hand very well together. Today I'm bringing in Nick Hymanson, another CFP on our team, to kind of help walk through some of these concepts that we talk to our clients all the time about, but I'm sure you as listeners are curious as to how someone can construct a financial plan and, see that all the way through, and what are the things that we need to be thinking about along the way. Because what happens is, we earn and we save, and then we have to spend it, and that has to last a long time. And that's where a lot of the anxiety can come in around how all of this is going to work, and is it going to work at all? And bottom line, our whole concept revolves around this idea of the peace of mind pathway, which I will talk about a little bit more, but it's all encompassing in this concept of a retirement-focused financial plan. So let's go ahead and kick it off. Nick, why don't you talk a little bit about just the beginning part of this is, this idea of I've been working and saving, and then I'm thinking about retirement. And what does that shift look like? And what do you see clients going through as they're thinking about this?
Yeah, so, it's a good question. Ultimately, we talk to clients who are essentially trying to figure out when they can retire and what that transition looks like. For many people, it's an emotional decision. It's also a mindset shift to go from accumulation of assets to actual distribution of assets and really, beginning to pay yourself and give yourself a paycheck. And so some of the fears that we consistently see across the board is really, am I going to run out of money? And also, what happens if the market goes down in retirement? And so we have kind of strategies in place specifically around investments that we'll talk about today to help transition someone from working in that accumulation phase to the distribution phase and really providing some protections there.
Yeah, so I know earlier I mentioned the title being a high net worth guide. I think there's a lot of definitions out of as to what high net worth is. For today's purpose, let's just imagine that we're talking to someone that has saved somewhere in the realms of a million or more of assets, not including property or anything like that, really just talking about investable assets. That's our loose definition of high net worth for today. So Nick's right? We save and we save and we save, and then somehow we have to start creating our own paycheck. And how is this going to work? And how is it going to last me 30 some odd years on top of how am I going to provide for the family? And am I going to leave money behind? So we can go into so many different areas. First thing we want to touch on today, and we're going to come back to this, is one of the biggest risks that we see as we approach retirement and start to go into that distribution phase is a technical term called sequence of returns risks. There's a lot of risks out there that we deal with when it comes to investing and planning. You have market risk, you've got inflation risk, you've got interest rate risk. One that's not talked about enough, I think, is sequence of returns risk. And so in a nutshell, what this is, and there's been a lot of case studies done on trying to explain this to someone, but in a nutshell, it's basically saying, depending on when we retire and depending on what types of returns we experience at the beginning of our retirement is strongly going to dictate the success of our outcomes and the success of how that plan operates. So what does that mean? So I've told a story of two individuals. They both saved the same amount of money. They both go with $1 million. They both each have $1 million of investable assets. And over a 10-year period, they both had the same average rate of return. And they're both spending or withdrawing the same amount of money every single year. The dollar they're withdrawing is arbitrary in this example, but what the key differentiator is in one person's life, they experienced rougher returns at the beginning of their retirement. So imagine a 2008, where it was really from 2007 to 2009, we have negative market returns that were pretty significant. Or imagine a 2001 type of scenario, that crisis as well, where you have negative returns at the beginning of your retirement. And then you go on to have some really good returns, and your average over, say, a 10-year period is rather strong, maybe in that 5, 6, 7, 8, very desirable rate of return. But at the beginning, we lost a lot of money up front, and on top of that, we were taking out $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year out of the portfolio as it was dropping. And if you experienced it, you probably felt like it was dropping every single day. And to go to the other person who actually walks into retirement and they got 20 positive returns for the first 3 to 5 years, and then they hit that negative 2008 downturn. The moral of the story here, and what sequence of returns risk is that depending on when we walk into, or what types of situations we walk into from market volatility, even if we have the exact same return over a period of time as an average, one scenario ends up way worse than the other. And so sequence of returns is something that it's not something that you can completely get rid of, but you can put strategies in place that we can really take away a lot of that risk. And that's what financial planning and investment strategy is all about, is trying to weigh this idea of risk versus reward. And, typically as people do enter into retirement, they start to think a little bit more conservative, this mentality of, hey, I've got what I've got. So, that's a little bit on that. We're going to come back to that with a bit of a strategy that we use to try to avoid some of that sequence of returns risk. So that's a big one. Nick, what are some other concerns that people have as they are thinking about retirement, entering into retirement?
Yeah, so, there's a bunch of concerns that can come up. Ultimately, some common ones are, inflation concerns. What's going to happen if, throughout my retirement, inflation averages at a higher percentage from compared to what I've seen over the last 10 years or 15 years. So we want to plan for that. Also, another concern is, hey, I'm now losing a paycheck and I want to make sure that my assets last. I want to make sure that I can actually fund myself from an income standpoint throughout my retirement. And, maybe I also have goals of leaving a certain amount behind. I also have goals of, taking Social Security at a certain time to maximize that for maybe my spouse. So there are certain strategies there that we can put in place from a withdrawal standpoint, but also an investment standpoint that can help achieve those. And also, something that's come up a lot with our clients lately is long-term care. So, and you've probably heard it, long-term care costs and long-term care insurance has become increasingly expensive. And so that's something that's a major concern down the road in most people's retirement plans, is how do I plan for that? How do I make sure that I can actually afford that, and make sure that, when I do need that care, that, I'm not a burden to my kids or grandkids or whoever it may be. So that's another major concern and risk in someone's retirement plan, and something that we'll talk about as well.
All right, so let's transition a little bit. What we've done so far is kind of talk through, well, what are the worries and the stressors as we plan for retirement, and now let's talk about a little bit about how we tackle those worries and ease the minds as people are working towards this goal of retirement, regardless of the age. And how do we do it? Well, we believe that everyone, regardless of assets, should have some element of a plan, and not try to just roll the dice on their future. And so that all is kind of fully encompassed in this term that we've come up with called the peace of mind pathway. If you think of a pathway, it's a guide. Some would liken it to a GPS, where we put in where we want to go, and the GPS tells us exactly how to get there. If there are, if there's construction in the way, there's hazards in the way, there's a wreck in the way, the GPS naturally is going to reroute us to get us to our destination. Maybe not on time, but it gets us there safely. And so that is, in a nutshell, what the pathway is. We want to not just look at investments. That's a big thing. And I think often we are so focused on how do I grow the money, we lose sight of all the other elements that are required for a sound financial plan, especially for retirement. So, the investments are important, but also what's equally important is, well, where's my fixed income coming from? So like Social Security, pension sources, maybe you got rental income. What about taxation in retirement? How is that going to work? We've got different types of asset classes that are taxed differently. We need to understand that. A lot of us have money in pre-tax buckets that we haven't paid a dime of taxes on yet. So are there tax strategies that we can employ as well? The estate plan, very important as well. If we're leaving money behind, we want to make sure it's done smoothly and effectively from a tax perspective, as well as just a less of a burden on the surviving spouse or the kids that are inheriting. Medicare, long-term care, all these things, that is the pathway that we kind of look through, and this idea of a roadmap that says, hey, here's where we are, here's where we want to get. And we want to do that in an enjoyable manner. So what are all the things that we need to think about in between, not just focusing on the investment side of things? And so once we have that pathway in place or that roadmap in place, well, then we go into implementation mode, which means now we are going to implement for our clients exactly what the pathway needs for success. And then the biggest piece of it, I think, is the third element. So you've got the roadmap, you've got the implementation phase, and then you've got the nurture phase, which means we're monitoring this. We're looking at it every single year, sometimes multiple times a year. Most of our clients today are getting 2 very structured meetings a year, one around financial planning, saying, hey, what's going on in your life this year? How's cash flow? What do we need to know about? What are your goals? And then the other is all around tax strategy. We bring in our tax specialist and she helps them think through, hey, here's what your tax scenario looks like for the year. And here's some adjustments we can make. Here's some things we can do to make your tax scenario a little bit better this year, as well as from a long-term perspective on taxation down the road. So there's a lot that goes into the peace of mind pathway, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But Nick, let's talk, I mentioned sequence of returns risk and how that's something we want to try to avoid as best as possible. I mentioned that we do have a bit of a strategy that works rather well. So let's talk a little bit about the 3-bucket investment strategy that we utilize.
Yeah, so this 3-bucket investment strategy, you may have heard of it on this podcast before. And ultimately what it is 3 different buckets: the cash bucket, the safety and income bucket, and then also the market bucket or the growth bucket. So, and each bucket has a different strategy in place. And I'll start with that cash bucket. So the cash bucket is really there for it's going to be a money market account. It's going to be checking, high yield savings, and really any amount that is someone's preference for how much they want to keep in cash at all times. For some people, that's 20,000. For others, that could be a few $100,000. That's something that we don't necessarily have a strong preference on, as long as it doesn't hurt someone's plan. And ultimately, that's a comfort zone and comfort amount for everyone in their own plan. So that's really what that cash bucket is there for. It's for emergencies. It's for monthly expenses, and really where the investment strategy and where the risk of sequence of returns is sort of diminished a little bit is the combination of the safety and income bucket as well as the market bucket. So those work hand in hand to reduce that risk. I'll talk about the safety bucket first, and really the goal there is a safe rate of return. So we say anywhere from 4 to 8%, just given the year and the situation, and also protection from market risk. And the safety bucket strategy is to give a safe withdrawal and without any risk of the downside. So still a good rate of return, because we don't want to sacrifice significantly a growth rate in something that can protect against inflation, but we want that money to really be for expenses and covering someone's retirement expenses for their needs and wants throughout their retirement plan. That sort of reduces the risk on the overall plan but provides the stability and security in someone's retirement so that they are not, considerably stressed and really relying on the market bucket to give them everything they need in retirement. And the market bucket's job is sort of a risk approach, but also growth long term. So we know that there's going to be fluctuations in the market. We've seen it a lot over the last 6 months, and we're probably going to continue to see it in the future. And there's going to be those down years. There's going to be those positive years like we've seen in the last two. So the market bucket is really going to be that long-term growth strategy that's going to offset inflation. It's going to be able to provide us the liquidity that we need. And that's your ETFs, that's your stocks and bonds in the market. And that's really there for that, larger growth, annualized growth percentage of, we can say, but depending on the investments, anywhere from 6 to 12%.
So how does this bucket strategy that Nick just described kind of alleviate some of that pressure of sequence of returns risk? Well, in a nutshell, I'll go back to my story of you retire and then the market crumbles, and for the next 3 years the market loses 30 to 50%, kind of like that 2008 debacle. Well, if all of your money is in the market, then you're going to be susceptible to that 30 to 50% loss. Whereas if we've got some element of bucketing where we do have money in the stock market, in the growth bucket, like Nick was talking about, well, yeah, that money is going to be exposed to loss, but is there for, I think a key thing he said is that it's long-term money. It is not there for our daily or monthly paycheck that we're going to start generating for ourselves. That's what the safety bucket is for. If we have enough in that safety bucket that can generate the cash flow that we need to, cover our needs and our wants for a extensive period of time, 5, 10, 15 years, whatever your comfort level is. Well, now we bought the growth bucket, that stock market, plenty of time to recover if there is a downturn. And if there's not a downturn, well, it's got plenty of time for cumulative compounding growth that the stock market, we know, provides if we give it enough time to do so. Another category that's kind of growing in popularity in the what I would consider in the growth bucket world is the alternative investment section of the world. Now, for a long time, this has been really a difficult space to get into. We go to investment conferences all the time, and you got to be worth tens of millions of dollars to get access to some of these alternative types of investments. Well, that world has changed quite a bit, and it's becoming more accessible in a liquid format. So in our portfolios, we use alternatives, and clients have access to those. And then there's also this term of an accredited investor, which is really that million or more of investable assets. That's one category. There's multiple definitions of accredited, but that's where you can kind of really get into private equity, private credit, general partnerships, all these different things, and what the data behind alternatives says. And by the way, this is not a billboard for go put all your money in alternatives. It's this whole theme is let's be well diversified to control risk, as well as to make sure we've got our cash flow needs taken care of. Alternatives serve as a piece of that pie. And the historical on alternatives is that their correlation to the stock market. So the stock market, just call it the S&P 500. Alternatives are not going to be moving like the market is. So if the market's down 30%, alternatives are maybe not down 30%. In fact, maybe they're positive. If the market's up 30%, alternatives are possibly down or maybe sideways, or maybe they're up 30%, right? The idea here is that they are not correlated. Whereas if you buy Apple stock and you're looking at the S&P, if Apple stock is down 1%, you better believe the S&P and the NASDAQ are kind of following suit because it's such a big piece of the market right now. So part of diversification is you don't just willy-nilly buy stocks and bonds and buy a bunch of them to hope that we've got good diversification. You got to buy different types of asset classes as well, which is where the alternatives can fit in place. We have a future podcast episode coming up specifically on alternatives with a really sharp guy. So be sure to tune into that. We're going to go way more into what that space looks like, but I just wanted to tease it here a little bit today. Okay, so we've talked about this idea of buckets and different types of investment classes. So, Nick, let's talk a little bit about, withdrawal strategies and how do we do this? What are things that we're looking at to make this effective and efficient for our clients?
Yeah. So, we ask the question from time to time to our clients, and it's essentially, if you were to have the safety and income bucket, which is not exposed to any market risk, actually be able to provide you the income that you need in retirement to cover all of your expenses, as well as some of your wants like vacations and gifts and all of charitable giving, things like that. Are you going to be worried about what's happening on a day-to-day basis in the market bucket? And, our strategy is really to make sure that our clients are not worried about the market bucket because they have that safety bucket in place. And that's really how this comes together. Ultimately, the goal here is, like Merce said, for that market bucket to be the long-term growth engine to provide that protection against inflation, but also be there down the road, which has for a bunch of accumulation over time. And that's where we see, ETFs, private market investments, alternatives, things like that, that's going to grow over time, whereas the safety bucket's really there to provide that predictable, secure income so that our clients are not worried about where they're going to get expense or income in retirement. It also just relieves the pressure on the market bucket. If we had to withdraw funds, getting back to that sequence of returns conversation, from an account that's down, it may actually affect its ability to recover and grow over time. And so the safety bucket allows us to not have to worry about that. What's also, extremely important is to, provide against or protect against significant loss. We try to do that on the market bucket side of things, but of course the safety bucket's really there to have no risk of loss in the market. And we believe that's a good strategy for retirement income.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about this year in particular, in 2025, we've had someone new or change of White House, change of just a lot of things going on in the political world. And some clients are very excited about what's happening. We have just as many clients that are very concerned and nervous. And, every day it seems like there's a headline that comes up that sparks some volatility in the market based off of a decision or something that was done or a concern about inflation still, whatever it is. And if you only have one investment strategy, you're constantly thinking about, well, do I need to be tweaking that strategy? Do I need to go more conservative, or is this a time to go more aggressive? Whereas what we believe is there is a place for aggressive money, and that's in the growth bucket, and there is a place for conservative money, and that's in the safety bucket. And now all we really need to do is make sure that those two allocations kind of stay in line. And yeah, we can shift here and there, but we're not overly concerned about whatever political climate comes our way or whatever geopolitical issue comes our way, just because we've got a predetermined type of risk exposure just based off of how much we put into the safety bucket and how much we put into the growth bucket. So I think at this point, maybe we talk a little bit about, so Nick sits in hundreds of meetings a year, working with clients, working with people that are interested in our services. And so he's pretty much seen not so great plans, and he's seen the best of the best when it comes to plans. So Nick, could you give us, some tips and things that people should be thinking about as they prepare to retire for retirement? Think of someone that's, 5 to 10 years out from retirement.
Yeah. So, like Mer said, I've seen a lot of different scenarios. Ultimately, we start with the conversation of when do you want to retire, or when does someone want to retire? And that kind of determines how we set up the retirement strategy. But planning ahead of time is so critically important because that can really define when retirement can happen for many people. So, for someone, they might say, I want to retire at 65 or 62 or 63 or whatever it ends up being. There are a lot of different things to think through, not only investment strategy to help really plan for that date and make sure that everything's in place and make sure we protect against any significant market loss before that time, but also things like withdrawal strategies and tax strategies and planning for healthcare. So things like that weren't necessarily a strategy before retirement are going to come to be very important as we get closer. And let's say the other scenario of, hey, maybe you love your job and you can see yourself working until 67 or 70, but at some point you do want to retire, then that's kind of a different conversation of, hey, how do we maximize growth until that point without taking too much risk? Obviously making sure that we're all comfortable with that risk, but making sure that we're still on the path for long-term growth, and based on your retirement plans, make sure we get there at the time you want.
So let's talk a little bit about, well, how do we do this? And if you're listening and you're thinking, oh, I don't have a bucket strategy, or I don't have a plan in place, I've never really sat down, or maybe, I'm getting close to thinking about all this stuff and I'd really like some help. Our offer to anyone out there is we think about this in that idea of the peace of mind pathway. So the roadmap, which is, hey, here's where we are today, here's where we want to get. And the get is usually, I want to have a successful retirement, whatever that means to you. And here's all the tools that we have to work with and all the things that we need to think about in between, from decisions around Social Security, Medicare, long-term care, the investment strategy, income strategy, tax strategies. It goes on. And that's something ever changing. So we get that in place, we go to work and we implement all that. And then we do make sure that we monitor that, because lives change. People move, people pass away, people are born, right? So life changes. And so we do need to nurture that plan year over year over year. So if this was of interest to you and you want to kind of see if maybe peace of mind wealth management could potentially help you, or at least guide you in the direction, let's hop on for a 15-minute phone call. Best way to get that scheduled is to go over to our website, pomwealth.net. In the top right-hand corner, you'll see a button that says click here to schedule. It'll take you to our calendars, and you'll be able to pick a time there that works best for you. And we'd be happy to have that conversation, tell you how we can help, or if not, at the very least, get some questions answered, and maybe we guide you to a better place, better suited for you. Well, that's all we got for you today. Nick, thanks for being here, and thanks for tuning in to the Secure Your Retirement podcast.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Secure Your Retirement. If you would like to learn more, we have actually created an online course called 3 Keys to Secure Your Retirement. This video course helps you to think through all the different steps as you get ready to plan for and live throughout retirement. You can access this by going to our website, pomwealth.net. In addition, you can also subscribe below to our podcast called Secure Your Retirement.
For more retirement tips, check out these videos. Also, if you find them valuable, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and give us a like.